We're good now. Everybody ready to roll? Okay, so here's what we see. We all know this. We have light. Good, thank you. We have light. It reflects off of something. It comes into this thing called an eyeball. Our eyeball takes it. It's a conduit. It's an information thing. It gets to the brain, and it makes sense out of it. This is what we're going to talk about right here, the lens. The key to seeing clearly has everything to do with this little thing right here called a lens. So let's start back. How has seeing evolved over time? Okay? Hang with me because this is important. And when you get a bottle of water today and you look through it and see something, you'll think of Seneca the Younger. Okay? And here's why. In early Rome, Seneca the Younger saw that Nero would go to the games and would look through an emerald, and he could see better through refracted glasses. Okay? Seneca and Pliny the Elder wrote about Nero. Seneca had said, wait a minute, when I look through a glass filled with water, I can see images. So all of a sudden, throughout history, people are interested in seeing more clearly. This is an important date. In the 10s around Baghdad, current day Baghdad, a scholar, El-Habib Hathin, who is known as Al-Hazin in the West, really did a lot of work on optics. Okay? They invented the magnifying glass. These people also invented algebra, the bane of school children forever. But we have a lot of math that was developed there. The problem was it was in Arabic and it wasn't translated. We go to the 1200s, and now this is a big European-oriented history because in the Americas, North and South America, even in Asia, there wasn't any developments with optics. Okay? And now we have the friars and the monks, and they're continually having to transcribe and copy. They began taking giant orbs of glass, cutting them in half, and putting them on the words to magnify. So their lens were starting to change, but it wasn't the lens of the eye. It was an external lens. The problem was that information wasn't transferred. Around the 1200s, Al-Hazin, from the 1000s, his writings began being translated into Latin. And so people started understanding the math of optics. And it was a bit of a game changer. So in Pisa, Italy is where the first spectacles were created. It was an indication that you could read. And so they became the rage. And especially, Mr. Gons, I got another problem. You're great. Thank you for your help. So where were we? We were in Pisa, Italy, weren't we? Right? And so there was a lot of trade between Asia and Europe at that time. And so the folks in Asia started loving the spectacles. And so all of a sudden, people began seeing more and more clearly. Roger Bacon, England, starts describing how light is refracted through a spherical glass. And now it enters in from just sort of trial and error, and that's an important term, so trial and error to all of a sudden people start understanding how optics work. And then boom, 1603, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, 1608 you had Jamestown, and this is like sort of recent history. Johann Kepler, German mathematician, he is incredibly important to the world of optics, to seeing clearly, because he described with mathematical formulas how it works. When that happened, once people understood the how of something works, once they dove down into the problem of optics, once they could understand the data, it was revolutionary. At the same time, so they started making spy glasses. You see this little fellow right down here? His name is Hans Lippershey. You've never heard of him, have you? Right? Here's why. He developed a spyglass. He was in the Netherlands. He tried to get a patent for it. By then, the spyglass was used a lot with military and a lot with maritime things. And so they just basically said it's not a secret. It's not a big deal. So that's why we've never heard of Hans, but it's to show you that it started becoming, the spyglass was a bit in the mainstream. Then this wonderful fella, and you'll never forget about Galileo. We know his name, don't we? Right? Here's the thing. He was a mathematician. He took the spyglass, the simple spyglass, and extended it to primitive telescopes, these are hanging in Florence right now. We can go look at them. Another Sunday visit would be pretty fun, right? We're in. Scottsdale's nice, but Florence, right? They're still hanging. And here's the incredible thing. While the spyglass was fine, he understood how his device could be used for astronomical things. But he also had a side hustle. Okay, and this is where we're going to camp for a second because this is the important. So we know Galileo for his work with the Saturn rings and saying that the moon was not smooth. But he had a side hustle. His side hustle, since he was in Venice, he would go up into, this is the Doges, and they would go up into a palace. Now, if I am a merchant, and this painting is by a guy named Bertini, you've got the Doge's palace, you've got clergy, you've got merchants, and this is Galileo. This is an fresco so that the quality is still good because it's lasted through the years. They also show a globe. Important because you got to remember in 1492, they didn't think the world was flat. Columbus, they just didn't think there was a continent in North and South America. They thought it was too great a distance between Europe and China, and that's why nobody was willing to sail it until Columbus. But what Galileo would do is he would make these spyglasses, make them into telescopes, and the merchants in Venice, I love this. So I'm about 6 feet tall. If I'm at the beach, if I'm at the shore, I can look out and I can look out about 2.8 miles. And the reason I can't look farther is because of the curvature of the earth. Okay? So if I go up 50 feet, only 50 feet, I can see 8 miles into the horizon. And so the merchants would go up in the towers and try to outlook each other and try to gain height on each other to be able to see which ships were coming. With Galileo's telescope, with new tools, with this brand new tool, they could not only see that there was a ship in the horizon, but they could see that the ship, they would know by the flags where it was coming from. And so the merchants who were normally down in the market square, scurrying around, operating their business, by changing their perspective, by getting away of the hustle and bustle, by coming to Scottsdale, by coming to Sono, by participating in this, by changing our perspective, the merchants and us gained a new insight because they were one step removed from the hustle and bustle of their daily operations. They would look through the telescopes and they would say, oh, okay, that boat, that's the one that always has laden with cinnamon coming from the southern part of Asia. And they would say, okay, its tonnage is low, it's got a lot of it. They would immediately go down to the marketplace and sell whatever inventory they had of cinnamon and then at a better price before the market was flooded. It gave them a competitive advantage by having a different perspective and by using tools. That's what we're here to do this week. Okay, is to learn from each other and to gain tools. So never forget this. Oh, this I just love this painting right here. Okay, for that reason. So what does this have to do with us? 5 years out, if we could see into the future, what would we want to see that our competitors don't see? Right? We would love to know. I mean, wouldn't it be nice to know what the price of Bitcoin is going to be, or who's going to win the Kentucky Derby, or something? Because we would bet everything you've got. If you knew that you knew that you knew the future, life would be more pleasant, but none of us ever can, correct? So we're going to talk about tools we need to see clearly and what barriers are obscuring us from our vision. Okay, so we're going to keep coming back to this fresco, and we're going to picture ourselves in this tower in Venice looking into the horizon. So there's a lot of companies that are trying to be very strategic in knowing the future. And so one of the reasons this needed to be a topic for Sono is that Teslas and Apples and Amazon and all these leading companies are bringing in a lot of strategists and futurists to try to use different tools to not predict the future, but to create different scenarios. There's one group that's done this really well over years. Chad Higbee is grinning and he's going to high-five me because it is our U.S. military. The U.S. military, before the Second Gulf War, they knew that the age of infantry going through a desert was going to come to an end, that the next phase of warfare might be more of a police action where the soldiers are walking through a city street and a 14-year-old boy comes out. Is it a play toy or is it a real gun? They have to make split-second decisions. They knew, so they developed that. They added that into the training. It was a plausible scenario that they felt good about predicting. So you've got the Joint Advanced Warfare Group in Norfolk. They're strategists in there. They're futurists for all branches of the military. The Naval War College in Newport. There's different places that our U.S. military uses as schools for scenario planning, and it's just starting to become more widespread in corporate America. And so that's what we're going to learn from. So here's how our U.S. military does this. They use scenario-based strategic planning. Scenario-based is going to be the key. They establish time frames, which we're going to review in a second, and based on the time frame, you can establish probabilities of those things occurring. We're going to work through one or two of them. So they establish time frames. The big thing is this: they identify driving forces. So right now, they knew and they were predicting that global warming is really a thing. And you can look in the Arctic Ocean, and the countries that border the Arctic Ocean basically are Russia, and you got a bit of Norway and Sweden, but really you've got Russia. And in the past, to go from Asia to Europe, you had to have an icebreaker, a big ship that would do it, and you would have one ship following behind it. It was incredibly inefficient. But that sea is getting much more navigable, and the shipping lanes are getting wider. And Russia knows it. They're watching it. 90% of their natural resources are up in that region as well. And so, thank you. Is that for me? Yep. Thank you. Oh, okay. Gonzo says that our internet is down, and he's trying to fix it. So the folks that are participating remotely are just going to have to figure this out themselves. Okay. Sorry, internet people. You're going to lose your slides for just 1 second. I'm going to restart the meeting. Okay, so I just need to stay here for a second?
Oh, no. I just need you to vamp for 1 second. You're going to lose your slides for just 1 second. I'm going to restart the meeting for the folks outside.
Okay. I don't really know how to vamp. Anybody know how to vamp? I was right, because when Gons wrote it, I was like, oh, I have one thing. Yes. All right, I do have a story for everything, but I do know that we're going to do introductions after this session. And I'm going to ask folks to tell us something interesting about you. And if you don't have something interesting, I'm going to ask which historical figure you would want to meet with, non-religious, with a bowl of ice cream, okay? So I'm going to start thinking about that. Okay, so real quick, the U.S. military, they know that that the Russians are going to have to protect those shipping lanes. And so if you'll look right now, and none of this is secretive stuff, and this is published things, and I just like to read it, so it's not like I'm telling state secrets. You know, Russia's putting a lot of bases and a lot of military up in that Arctic region, because if you look on a map, anybody here fly to Europe? You don't just fly to Europe, you go up the globe and over. It's shorter. If you look at the difference between Asia and Europe, if they can make this shipping lane navigable, and you don't have to go all the way around the Cape of Horn, and it can revolutionize them, and they will actually own that shipping space. And so there's a lot going on right now that the military is watching. So a lot's happening in the Arctic that before it was kind of interesting, but not really done. Also like nuclear, the submarines. If it wasn't for humans, those things can stay on the bottom of the ocean for 50 years. And so that's a concern the military has. Okay, we've got nuke subs, and lots of countries have them, and they can plant them on the base of the ocean and let them creep along, and it won't hit the radars because of the plate tectonic stuff has to allow for a certain amount of movement in the ocean floor anyway. So this is what our military is having to deal with, and it's human lives. And so what they do with scenario planning is they establish what time frame. Then they look years out. I mean, they've even got models where you're going to say, okay, what if or what when other folks from other worlds come here? It's a plausible scenario. They look at driving forces, which we're going to do in a second. They make assumptions. This one's critical. Have you ever been in a room and you started talking about things in the future, and one person started dominating the conversation and acted like a know-it-all? Like this is going to happen. Oh, this is going to. It's the loudest person with the loudest voice sometimes can start shifting that. It's like when we brainstorm or think creatively. So what the military does is they have to back it up with evidence. And they score the evidence, and I'll share with that in a second. The big one is developing plausible scenarios. With plausible scenarios, they'll say, okay, what if these two things happen? How do we position ourselves well? Where are we vulnerable? They'll bring in other nations. So you'll have NATO countries coming, and they'll do war games all the time. They not only would do war games and look at it from their perspective, they'll have somebody else play the role of the opposing forces. So right now, how do you handle North Korean hacking? How do you handle Russian aggression over here? And what happens here with China? All of these things, they're making plausible scenarios all the time. The reason the military really has to do this is for them to make changes, it takes years. And so a lot of these changes have to be done incrementally. We talked last year when Mark was presenting on creativity about the importance of creativity being iterative. And that's what scenario planning is and strategic foresight is. It's understanding plausible scenarios. As we get further in time, what were plausible scenarios, we can start betting on it sometimes actually happening and sometimes not at all. But it's that we don't bet the farm on that scenario. We position ourselves well to take advantage of that scenario if it unfolds. So then they work backwards, and that's that part of what, as future, as we advance into future, what's unknown becomes less, and how to position ourselves well. Sounds theoretical, we're going to actually do it. So again, using this map, and a lot of this now has been taken the way the military approaches it, and there's a lot of private companies getting paid a lot to do consulting space and strategic foresight. So they'll say, okay, 12 to 24 months is tactical. Everybody in here does a budget, right? 12 to 24 months. Okay, then they say strategic planning is 2 to 8 years. Well, sometimes when we do strategic planning, we're simply extrapolating our P&L or our whatever and making a few assumptions, and we call that strategic planning. The way the military bases it, it says, okay, tactical is short term, 1 to 2 years, strategic planning is 2 to 8. Then they want to camp out here, 5 to 10 years and 10 years and more. These are system level disruptions and evolution that we don't even know what's going to happen yet. They're looking at, gosh, what other types of warfare are going to exist. I mean, the next battle is going to be, with satellites. The ability for drones to be operated so you don't have humans flying these things now is being used more underwater. And so submarines and things, and what I mentioned, these nuclear subs can sit on the ocean floor, they can be remote controlled now. And countries across the world are doing it. So it shows you the importance of the CIA, of intelligence communities getting it right and assigning probabilities. When I talked about how do we score people's contributions, the way the military does, and Future Today is a group that's doing this privately for companies. Somebody can have an opinion of what's going to happen with cryptocurrency. Okay? None of us really know. We just know it's a driving trend. It's here. Well, if somebody has a pure gut, it's just good to give that a score of a 1, all the way down to a 4. Okay, we've got real data, real math, real knowledge. Scoring assumptions versus knowledge and rating it keeps us focused on the importance of the knowledge, the evidence and the knowledge, but it accommodates for pure gut and just becoming familiar. There's great value in pure gut. There's great value in thinking of the future. You just can't bet the farm on that future because that's just a scenario. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. Here's some trends that I wrote down that hospices and organizations serving them really need to start including. Now, what we do at Qualis, and we manage DME for hospices, y'all know. Typically on Mondays we have a marketing meeting, and we'll conclude that marketing meeting with some type of thing that's occurring. A few weeks ago, Jared, it was what? Non-fungible tokens. And it was like, okay, what would that mean for hospices as that gains in popularity? What does those kind of things? So it can be, and sometimes it's like, well, not really anything. Okay, Medicare Advantage carve-in. We talked, I think, was our first symposium 6 years ago? Somewhere like that? Seven? I remember sitting right here, and one of the subjects was, what is going to be the future of managed care in hospice? And we called it managed care. I called it managed care. That's the only thing I'd heard. Well, now that scenario was a trend that was occurring. We were talking about how to position hospices well, what will hospices need to do, and that's really kind of called Medicare carve-in, at least right now. So at 10 o'clock, I'm going to ask Dr. Tim just to give a quick overview because Mark Lewandowski interviewed him yesterday for over an hour on a specific Medicare Advantage carve-in, how do hospices position yourselves well to take advantage? What do we need to do to be adaptive hospices? And so for folks that are remote and folks that are here, that's a bonus session, and we'll just send it to you electronically. We wanted to record it so we could encapsulate it. So Medicare Advantage carve-in, it's a driving trend. Value-based payment models, what's that going to do to our industry? Personal devices, smart eyeglasses, smart watches, smart wearables. That's a trend. We know this thing is happening, correct? Consumer electronics, smart homes, remote work. I mean, during COVID, we were just talking about it. I mean, folks now that never would have Zoomed 2 years ago now can Zoom all day long. My mother's 87. She is a Zooming machine. She's an iPad machine. People years ago were saying there's going to be, the boomers might have the electronics piece, but the older Americans not yet. I'm finding the older Americans are pretty quick. They're grabbing it because the technology is getting easier. That's one of these trends, I'm sure, as operating a hospice at some point, you're going to want to consider, how do I do more remote monitoring? And how do I need to segregate at times my patients with those that are adapted at technology and can communicate bidirectional from those that aren't? Recognition and scoring with face and algorithms and surveillance. It can get to be creepy here, but we know that this is occurring all the time. Leads us to our next one, the new realities. Journalism, again, using algorithms where virtual relationships, people can receive the news that they're predetermined or predisposed to want to already receive, correct? That's happening now. Okay, so if there's one Hall Thorpe and I want to find 50 of me, I can now find 50 of me. Big-eared Southerners that like to joke and like to laugh. I can find my group, and I can find my news, and I can find those that are interested in Galileo, and I can find my group. Increasingly, it's easy for people to find their group. The disadvantage of that is the balkanization of us, is that people then all of a sudden don't even have the same perspective, and if there's conflict, they look at the other side like complete idiots because it's not the news they were receiving. That's going to be one of those things where our patients and our caregivers increasingly can take advantage of those virtual relationships, but sometimes to our detriment and their detriment. Culture, work, play. We've got employees that work a lot and play a lot, and how people even consider work is different. My son has just gotten gainfully employed in Greenville, South Carolina, and part of his compensation was a cell phone stipend. And I'm like, really? I mean, a cell phone stipend just means they pay you less, but they call it something different. And he was talking about, but people my age love having, okay, I get this MacBook and I get my cell phone, $200 a month towards my cell phone. That sells, that creates that sort of buzz within that group, because our employees are going to want to look at work, culture, and play, and sometimes intertwine them. Privacy and security. I mean, we got hospices and we serve hospices. Protection of our physical and our economic and our reputation is huge. And this is a prevailing trend where we're going to have to be positioned well to defend ourselves from all kinds of breaches. We mentioned Bitcoin or blockchain, cryptocurrencies. There's all types of new investors, investor classes, investor types, people that are afraid even to invest in publicly traded securities because they think the valuations might be too high. And so there's a lot of private equity, there's a lot of different money, a lot of different types, a lot of hedge funds that are doing some really neat things. New investors and new investor types are going to grow. So 5G, robots, mobility, drones, getting immediate feedback is another prevailing trend. Biotech and agriculture. You got to start with the first one with viruses, right? I mean, who thought 2 years ago that we would be having to move this to April? And I'm thankful we did. But, COVID has thrown a monkey wrench into things, hasn't it? The fact that we're having to wear masks all the time. And those things are going to that's a prevailing trend that won't stop, because the next virus that comes, and it's COVID or close, where people are already going to know how to react. They're going to already have set assumptions on masks and on social distancing and things like that. So it's here. Synthetic biology, CRISPR, gene sequencing, vaccines, brain-machine interface, new agricultural methods. I mean, it's getting to be kind of fun and it's getting to be kind of creepy at the same time. That's the future. Finally, energy and climate space. We talked about, the global warming piece and what it's doing to the Arctic Ocean. And energy types is changing. So when we say prevailing trends, these are fun topics to talk about. And there's no right or wrong answer. None of us know exactly the future of any of these things. But these are examples of ones that I called and just thought about that impact every hospice in some way. And so what I would recommend is that part of your strategic planning to grab a couple of these topics and just start saying, well, what if? So here's an example. Let's look down here at energy types. Electric vehicles. Who in here has your own fleet of cars that your staff uses? And who reimburses? Also, who reimburses mileage? And then who has a fleet? I know Heart and Home does. I know some folks do. I know some hospitals are now starting to look at it. I would like for us to have a topic next year on the math of fleet versus reimbursement, because here's what's getting ready to happen. I'm sorry y'all can't see this closely. This was a Bloomberg article, and it said by 2020, the price of EV cars, electric vehicles, and hybrids hits the point where it's equal to the combustible chain, the kind of cars we had, the gasoline things now. Say that again, Chad.
Gas-powered?
Yes, gas-powered cars. Yes, combustible engine. Yes. This is the thing. So if we wanted to say, okay, what is the impact of electric vehicles going to be on my hospice? Well, we know that I believe this number is 8% of a hospice's program expense, so not including compensation, go towards reimbursement, go towards travel. It matters to y'all, right? I mean, travel's a big number. Current market share in the U.S. of electric vehicles is 2%. So it's really small right now. We know that. So down here are sites. Okay, so I went through and I found evidence at different time frames. And so we're certain of this one. Now we know in China and we know in Europe, but especially in China, the cars are smaller, they're lighter. It's like 10, 15% and growing exponentially. So the big question gets to be not the cost of the vehicle, which is now about equal, going to be about equal, but the fueling cost. That gets to be where the electric vehicles get a lot cheaper. And so I'm sure some hospices and some fleets are going to start saying, okay, I don't want to dictate to my employees that they buy one of those cars, but I might have a fleet and we're going to plug them in our office, and then they'll come and just exchange the cars. The reason is the cost of the electric vehicles to operate is much lower because they're using electricity. Market share of electric vehicles during the next 2 years. So if we look 2 years out, it's expected to be at 2.5. As a percentage increase, it's a decent percentage increase. It's 25%. But it's not a huge number, and the reason has to be because of the cost of the cars. But here's where it gets to be interesting. According to these folks down here, market share in 2 to 5 years is expected to be 10%. After 10 years, 20%. Again, these are projections, and as you go further out, your confidence decreases in them, so you can score it a 1 through a 4. But market share in EVs in 10 years is going to be 80%. By 2050, they feel 80% of the cars are, and that includes trucks, that includes fleets, and then that includes ways to refuel them so you're not having to plug them in. So there's dynamic grids, and as they drive, it works like an alternator, and they're automatically recharged. I mean, the trend of EVs and hybrid vehicles is going that way, and it's going to affect our business. And so if you're reimbursing at, 52, 56 cents a mile, IRS, is that about right? That math, that starts changing some of the math. You don't have to go and say, I'm going to rush to electronic vehicles today, but know as you budget and as we budget that we might really put that on our radar. Let's just always, when we look at travel, at some point, should it make sense to have our own fleet or to encourage our employees or through something like Sono that we can get better rates if your employees choose to own it, okay? So this is simply an example. These are more like exercises that we can do that are useful. All right, remote patient monitoring. You remember these guys right here? We're up in the tower. We can now see way out. Patient motion. What's going to happen with this? And this is the point. I've got a flip chart, and I'm standing right here. What are some opinions that remote patient monitoring are going to do in the next 2 years, and how does that affect your hospice? Anybody have a thought? Is anybody doing any remote patient monitoring today? Can you tell us how you do it?
Well, we implemented it in the last year for a lot of patients who were sick with COVID. And so we, at the ER and the doctor's office, we had bags ready to go, and it had a blood pressure cuff, an oximeter, and the base unit that then transmitted into our computer system.
Right.
So we could monitor them throughout the day. And we were able to catch people that were starting to desat and get them to the hospital, or be able to keep people out of the hospital by having the equipment monitoring.
Thank you.
We don't use it in our hospice programs, but we use it with our home health.
So they're part of the health system in Kansas City, and that lends itself because you're trying to reduce the readmissions and the whole bit, right? Yep. So it makes sense in the continuum of care. And I think that's going to drive a lot of it, and I think that gives it that Medicare carve-in. I believe as we do more of a continuum of care, the importance of remote patient monitoring are going to be more strategic to us. Anyone else doing it actively today? Okay, in 2 to 5 years, currently a lot of the remote patient monitoring is one way. It's I've got a smartwatch or I've got something, and it reports that data back to a dashboard, and somebody's able to watch it. Most of the articles, most of the thought leaders in that space are saying increasingly it's going to be bidirectional and interactive, so that if something is going on, it can give directions on what to do next, who to call, how to act, where to go. So a lot of that's going to increase to be bidirectional.
We're about to start doing it with CureGuard, and it's exactly what you're saying.
CureGuard.
Yes.
What are the devices?
The family can download an app on their phone,
Mm-hmm.
or if you have patients in an assisted living, let's say, and you've got the med tech, there's a patch. There's a patch that can do it for you, and you can have a nurse just watching. We're going to be doing it on our palliative side. And then, like you said, they give you equipment, and all that is entered.
Mm-hmm.
And we're able to view. I was a little skeptical, a little bit, so I'm getting more comfortable, because I want to make sure that we set ourselves up, for success. So I like to pick some people's brains, see kind of what you think.
Yes.
But we're about to do a pilot, probably within the next 30 to 45 days in regards to that.
Thank you.
So it's exciting, but for me personally, I think for COVID off for obvious reasons, but I think eyes on a patient physically,
Yep.
I hope we don't get away from that, because I think that could cause a lot of problems.
Absolutely. We had a fella come in here, I think 2 or 3 years ago, with a remote patient monitoring system. Not that we cared about his system, because we're agnostic. We don't care, but it was a knowledge thing. It was, okay, let's start thinking about it, because we know this is going to be the future. We got to know what questions we need to ask. We need to know within us who we need to call, who might be further along on the learning curve than we are. So, just of that big example, electronic vehicles and remote patient monitoring are two things. And that's all we're talking about with looking out from a different perspective. It's going to places like this and actually having these kind of conversations. We don't have to have the answers today. We just have to be aware of what the questions are. And there's a great value in that. And as leaders of hospice, we can't, and organizations that serve them, we can't say, oh my gosh, I feel bad because I'm not in the office today. You're actually in the office. You're just extending that view further. And so thank you all for coming, because this is important to the long-term success of our organizations. Okay, so the big thing is, my one big takeaway is this. We're here. Scenarios are here. We're not going to bet the farm on any potential future scenario, right? Our job is to say, these are probable scenarios. Here's how I'm going to react. And what we'll find is this. Let's just say one probable scenario is that CMS increases reimbursement in the next 5 years 5%. Okay, who wins in that? Well, it's the one that has more market share. It's the one that can grow and operate efficiently, so that goes down to margin. Correct? Right? Everybody agree? Another plausible scenario is they don't do anything. That rates remain the same. Who wins in that? Who loses in that? It's the one that operates the most efficiently, the most lean, the one that leverages even technology. One of the reasons that this fella a few years ago came in on the remote patient monitoring is his whole hook was, there's going to be a labor shortage. So is labor going to be a rising cost for you to find good folks? And can you offset that partly with technology that fits your culture and fits your brand and is actually an order winner for you? And so thinking about these things becomes strategic. You don't have to have the answers. You just have to start, all of us have to start thinking about the future and knowing it's happening sooner and quicker than even people project. Okay, so the key is to position ourselves well. Going back to that example, CMS increases 5%. The ones who wins are those that operate efficiently and gain market share. Holds common, it's those that operate very well. What if they decrease their reimbursement 5%? Who wins? Who loses? The one who wins is the one that's got more volume and has been operating lean. So regardless of which future scenario unfolds, in those three plausible scenarios, there's common things that need to be done to position yourself well, regardless of which one of those. And that's to operate well, to grow, to get referrals. It's those things that we already know. But part of it is explaining to our staffs the strategic logic of why we're doing these things. If we're a publicly if we are a not-for-profit and your P&Ls are published and your employees look and they can say, well, gosh, we're making a whole lot of money. Why don't we have puppy day every day? Or why don't we have free ice cream? Or why don't we get fat and happy right now? Because we have margins. There's a reason why we need to operate well, and it has to do about the future. And the economists call it the replacement cost. So if you go to a convenience store and price of gas is projected to go up, they're going to go ahead and increase the price of gas because they've got to replace the inventory. We've got to think of it that way. We have to be proactive as much as we can, knowing that these scenarios are going to occur. We just have to operate really well here to be positioned well, regardless. Folks that think they know the future are the ones that get in trouble. The folks that bet the whole farm on it are the ones that end up going under because they're going to be wrong. Okay, so we're not through with history because in 1625, Galileo did an incredible thing. All right, he invented the compound microscope. He had a side hustle. I'm going to put Stanley right here. Y'all, the guys in Venice didn't want him sharing the knowledge. He couldn't stand it. He didn't care about his side hustle. He cared about the telescope more. But the merchants tried to control the supply of telescopes. Guys, I've messed up, or one of us did. So in the 1600s, Galileo did an incredible thing. He went to Rome and he saw kind of a microscope. And all he did is he went back to Pisa and to Venice and he flipped the telescope upside down so he looked into the big side, saw the small side, and saw it was microscopic. So the guy that really invented the telescope also really invented the microscope. That's the second part of this real quick, but we're going to run through it because it's the very end. We've got about 5 more minutes here. So Galileo invented the telescope and he called it the little eye, and that's what the thing looks like. Okay, our data, so if we're using the telescope and we're changing our lens to try to see into the future with scenario planning, there's also things that we can do today with our data. By drilling down in our data, by measuring, and by having financial proof of compliance and comparing. So we're going to look at the 3 of these. And again, this is just simply the first microscope. It's incredible. I don't know where that one is. I know the other telescopes are in Florence, but that's where it's going. I did something again, Mr. Gons.
You're okay. It's not your fault. It's the internet.
I need to have that as a quote in life. Hall, it's not your fault. I need that. I need that thing on my lanyard. Yeah, not my fault. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so drilling down is something that we do. The purpose of this right here is to encourage us to continue doing it and to realize how important it is and that we can learn from each other. Drilling down, benchmarking, and modeling to know what to measure, how we gather the data, and what we're going to do with it. So like CMS, increasingly, if they go with value-based models, it's going to run on data and data and data. The more you talk to folks, the more you listen, the more you read, we've got to make a case by having the data. We have to know that the future of Medicare carve-ins and managed care is going to be hospice is an important part, palliative is an important part, home health is an important part. All of these are part of silos in the continuum of care, and we have to make sure that we have the reporting mechanisms and the measuring mechanisms to be able to comply with new revenue streams. Okay? Like star ratings, those are just quality ratings that Medicare is going to have in health systems. Increasingly, they're going to influence us in hospice. The HARP program with the hospital readmissions reduction program, it can lead a lot into remote patient monitoring and those kind of things. So as we drill down in data and as we comply with these things, and we are very familiar with the CAP surveys, aren't we? Right? So this is 3 examples of data being used increasingly that a few years ago wasn't.
It's not my fault.
The second one, you are great. I'm going to flip it to the next page. Yep. The second thing is we not only have to know our data, but this is incredibly important too, is to show. Sales team can't just go out. I love this quote. Somebody just said every customer expects a salesperson to sing the praises of their product or service, but data provides the proof. So CMS is going to allow in their Medicare B professional claims for hospices to be able to swim upstream and to see who entered hospice and where that referral source sent them. So according to the hospice I've talked to now, you don't really know sometimes if you're getting all the referrals from your referral source. You think you might be getting some. Now you'll kind of know where they're going. Well Sky is participating with us today remotely, and their strategist had, and I think that's his actual title, it was quoted in a great article, and his point was your number one priority is that you should work towards finding one or two key metrics you can use to differentiate yourselves. So you have to use your data, you have to go in, you have to prove your point. I don't do referrals, I don't have to go into those referral sources, but increasingly using data to show outcomes for your patients are better than your competitors is going to give a strategic advantage. Readmissions compared to those you compete with is going to be an advantage. Your CAP scores compared to others, your feedback, just general comments in the community get to become gold. And it's all data. One final thing. With data and with strategic foresight, these are theoretical things. They're even kind of difficult to share. We all get it because you're senior leaders of hospices. You understand what the point is. But sometimes within your organization, you've got people that aren't thinking strategically about your hospice or a company that serves your hospice. And so the current thoughts on the best way to communicate strategic foresight, scenario planning, drilling down on data has to do with not just it being data-driven so that people can trust the math. They have to be able to trust the source. They also have to have powerful visuals. If you haven't looked at the Visual Capitalist, take visualcapitalist.com. You got to take a look. Go to their website. You can enter in your email. Every day, they'll give you an incredible update on a topic of interest. It's so good that I have to send it to my clutter every day or I will rob my company of 20 minutes. I'll sit there and stop what I'm doing and look at it. So I look at it on Sundays. They send a compilation of all the articles they've written that week. The articles are only like 3 paragraphs, but they're visuals. We're used to Venn diagrams, bar charts, traditional things. The Visual Capitalist will let data sing. It will let the data just come to life. It's incredibly great in their visual. That's the biggest strength of it. It takes a very complex comparison or thing, and they're gifted at having great, powerful visuals with a short, quick story. People get their head around it, then you can move on to the next thing. I wanted to include this because some of us, I have a tendency just to look at the data, and I'll say, here's a spreadsheet, and I expect everyone just to look at the spreadsheet the way I look at the spreadsheet. But the narrative and the story around it and having powerful visuals is where people really seem to get it. That's a growing area of study, is how to communicate where people can understand. And it takes these 3 things in combination, but so many times we just stick with the data. Okay? One final slide. It's the takeaways. Tonight we're going to have a telescope in the parking lot. And this is the real telescope. And it was funny because in the agenda, Seth had just written down, Mark, the Meteor Man, is going to show us about a telescope. And I was like, that can't be our Mark, right? I mean, it can't be our Mark Lewandowski, with this telescope in the back of your truck, right? It has to be a guy who's a real guy. There's a real, guy that's going to do it. We're going to see what seeing clearly looks like in the planets. The takeaway is this. It's important that we do take time to come to Sono. It's important for you to go hike with your staff. It's important that we take time to carve away, but if we don't give ourselves permission to do that, we're not inclined to do that. It's important to stay fresh and to stay different and to gain perspective, to go from seeing the horizon 2 miles away to going just 50 feet and seeing 8 miles away. It's important. We don't have to see the future, but we just have to know some trends. So when we do tactical planning and budgets, let's also include some strategic planning and some system level disruption conversations, saying what trends are out there that are going to impact us in 1 year, 4 years, 10 years, and maybe 20 years. And there's nothing sometimes you want to do about it, but having conversations are important. So then work backwards. Who wins? Who loses? Even at times do war games where you can say, okay, this thing's really coming. And I've got these 2 competitors. And in my market share, I've got to gain this referral or I've got to have this. How are they going to react? And you actually can have people play their role. And you can do war games. And that's what our military is so good at. They're brilliant at it. And so we look at strategic planning and we make accommodations for the future. We build that into our planning, but we don't bet the farm on any particular scenario unfolding. We also use data to see clearer. So we've gone here from the telescope, now we're in the microscope. There's got to be ways that our data can tell stories. There's got to be ways you can get more data from your vendors, from your EMR. I believe you're going to see more EMRs have plug-in and more strategic relationships with data houses that can take data, not just from you, but do more benchmarking and more combinations. Andrew Reed's company, Multiview, does a lot of that kind of thing. That's the future of drilling down on the data. The data is going to be what you can prove. So let's make sure that we start learning how to communicate data so that your salespeople can communicate your value proposition beyond just saying, hey, we're really good. But no, I can show you how good we are. And here's an example. And then the best way to see the future is to actually help create it. That's a lot of what Elon Musk is doing. A lot of the stuff that people are trying to do is to help just get people to react to them. And this is easier said than done, but if we can do things to force our competitors and the market to react to your industry leadership, it makes you more of a navigator of the future as opposed to just an observer of it trying to adapt. Okay? Now, Mark.
I'll wait till you get.
I am completely done.
Okay, I'm really excited about, like last night was the most integration of all the people at the symposium
Yes, it was.
ever had on a first night. So that's like a crazy, great. And my wife asked me this morning why, and I said I don't really know, but there's
Right.
a lot of different variables. But I want to say that I think part of our dialogue that we should have as part of this discussion is how are we going to handle labor? Because right now there's so many people laid off, and yet it's so hard to find employees.
Yes, it is.
It's like crazy. Like people don't have jobs.
Yes.
And we need somebody, and we have professional people trying to attract them. We
Right.
get one candidate. So
Yes.
I think that when we look at, okay, here's our challenge today. What's our tactic right now?
Right.
What's our strategic plan? What's our vision
Mm-hmm.
for the future? Our vision for the future has to include, as an example, how are we going to attract and keep really high quality employees?
Yes.
And what kind of methodology for compensation are we going to have to give them to attract and keep them?
Yes.
Because this is a different kind of group. So this is
It is.
this part of what I want to be is a dialogue maybe at the 10 o'clock.
That's correct.
But I'm giving you an example of how I think through problems. The other thing that we're dealing with is if I have a sample of one employee candidate, I am naturally inclined to want to hire that person to fill that seat.
Yep.
However, if I was smart and strategic, I would say to myself, okay, I want more Jamies and I want more Jordans. That's what I want. So I'm going to do a test of their personality profile
Yep.
and find out the critical variables that are common between both parties so that I don't look at people that are just like me, which
Yep.
is a trend we all have, is we want to find people like us. I want to look for the critical variables, regardless of personality type,
Yep.
that make them successful within my organization. So I don't sample everybody in my population. I sample the people that I want, that I think are the most successful in our culture. If I don't do that now, I can't use that tool a year from now. Okay, so here we are in a situation where we got unemployment rampant, but now these people are used to living at home. We can't
Right.
have them live at home. They have to be mobile. They have to get out.
Yeah.
How are we going to adjust? What are we going to do? How do we plan strategically for
Yes.
these changes? I'll say one more thing I think about is today in our world, we've got police under enormous scrutiny, okay? And we are too in hospice under scrutiny.
Yes.
Okay, so right now, what we all want is cameras on those policemen because we know that out of 100 policemen, 99 of them are fantastic in doing what they're supposed to do for the right reason. And one of them gets half of the 1% panics and makes a poor decision, and the other 1/2% are bad apples, right?
Right.
Whatever the numbers are. But I can see technology getting to the place where there may be someday even cameras on the classes that
Yes.
our caregivers provide at home, providing documentation of the work,
Yes.
documentation of the quality of the workflow, ways that we can measure not outcomes but what they did
Yes.
in the home. And I think that last thing I'll say, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No.
tomorrow we have Andrew Reed coming. And Andrew is a real thought leader in creative ways to compensate employees, but I want to make sure everybody knows, we're not advocating Andrew Reed's model.
Correct.
We're bringing Andrew Reed in as an example
Yeah.
of what I call firm opinions loosely held. If you go in my office, right there on the wall says, firm opinions loosely held. Because what we want is we go,
Right.
this is how we're going to do it. Oh, you have a better idea?
Yeah.
I'll take that one. Right? So the worst leadership is the ones that never let go of a bad idea to take on a better idea.
I agree.
So what I'm trying to present is we've got a presentation. This whole week is strategically built to help us all think better about ways to be successful in the future. Sorry about
Well
that
said.
interruption.
No, I agree. So like at 10 o'clock, some people submitted questions that we're going to just address, and one of them is, it was interesting. One of them was how to find great employees now. And then one of them was, we talked last year about managing millennials. What about that old legacy employee that's just sticking around and not adding as much value as they did? What do you do, right? And I don't want to lead that part because I know my Qualis folks, we said, Thorpe, you don't, right? Yeah. But that's what we're going to address. And to Mark's point, like next year, I would love to have somebody come in and do the fleet piece and say, this is what you need to consider, whether you need to lease or own, or how do you do reimbursement, and what's just, not that I care, not that we care, but it's information that's useful. So like with Andrew Reed, we're not advocating NVI, we just know that he's a good resource for that kind of thing. That's got to be part of the purpose of Sono, is that we care. We created this for hospices, and nobody has the right answer. We don't have a dog in the fight, and we'll never endorse a product that any of us ever benefit from. That's one of the reasons we like for it to be a sales-free zone. And the biggest challenge we have is telling vendors, no, 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 we don't. Or if you come, you got to come just like this, and you got to be here just during this time. And they don't want to do it because we don't want this to become a typical symposium or an exhibit booth, and y'all have to walk through the gauntlet. None of us want to do that. Smart folks don't like that, right?